The clinking of silverware on porcelain was the only music in the restaurant, a sterile symphony for the lonely. Julian Vance sat opposite his 7-year-old daughter, Maya, in a booth upholstered with cold, gray leather. The restaurant, all chrome and glass, was his design, a monument to minimalist success, and he was beginning to realize a perfect reflection of his own life. Empty, polished, devoid of warmth. "Daddy, are you listening?" Maya's voice, a small, bright bird in the cavernous room, pulled him from his thoughts. Always, sweet pea, he forced a smile, the muscles in his face feeling stiff from disuse. He was here, but his mind was miles away, wandering through the blueprints of his latest project, a skyscraper that would scrape the clouds and cast a shadow over half the city. Another trophy for a man who had no one to share it with. "I was saying that Leo from my class drew a picture of a griffin, but he gave it a unicorn horn. Can a griffin have a unicorn horn?" "I think," Julian said, leaning forward conspiratorially, "a griffin can have whatever you want it to have." Her giggle was a relief, a splash of color in his monochrome world. He lived for these small moments, these fragile anchors that kept him from drifting away entirely. Since the divorce, since the betrayal that had shattered his firm and his faith in people, Maya was his only light. He had built a fortress of wealth and success around them, but he knew in the quiet hours of the night that it was a prison. His gaze drifted to a nearby table. A woman with tired, kind eyes was trying to coax a little boy into eating his green beans. The boy, who looked to be around Maya's age, shook his head, his dark curls bouncing. He wasn't throwing a tantrum. His refusal was quiet, solemn. He clutched a sketchbook and a set of colored pencils as if they were a shield. Julian felt a strange pang of recognition, not for them, but for the quiet bubble of solitude they occupied, so much like his own. The woman, Elara, sighed softly, her shoulders slumping just a little. "Just one, Leo." "For me." Leo shook his head again, his eyes wide and unblinking. It was then that the evening's sterile peace was shattered. Two men, their suits too loud and their laughter too sharp, swaggered toward their table. They had been at the bar, growing progressively louder with each drink. Well, what have we got here?" the first man said, his voice slurring as he leaned over Elara's table. "Dining all alone? A pretty thing like you shouldn't be alone." Elara stiffened, her hand instinctively moving to rest on her son's shoulder. "We're fine, thank you. Please leave us alone." "Oh, feisty," the second man chuckled, moving to block her exit. "We just want to be friendly," he reached out, his hand aiming for her arm. Something inside Julian, a coiled and dormant thing, snapped taut. He saw the flash of sheer terror in Elara's eyes, the way her son shrank into himself, his small body trembling. It was the predatory circling, the casual violation of a safe space, that ignited a cold, precise fury in him. This was a different kind of fight than the ones he waged in boardrooms, but the objective was the same: protect what matters. He was on his feet before he'd consciously decided to move. "Maya, stay here," he said, his voice low and calm. He crossed the space between their tables in 3 long, silent strides. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply placed himself between the men and Elara's table. "The lady asked you to leave," Julian said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, yet it carried an authority that made both men pause. The first man scoffed, puffing out his chest. "And who the hell are you?" "Her bodyguard." "I'm the man telling you to walk away," Julian replied, his eyes never leaving the man's. He registered everything. The man's weight distribution, his slightly off-balance stance from the alcohol, the way his friend was nervously shifting his feet. "Or what?" the man sneered, taking a step forward. Julian didn't answer with words. As the man shoved him, Julian used the man's own momentum, redirecting his force with a fluid pivot. An arm lock, precise and economical, had the man wincing in pain, his swagger instantly gone. The second man charged, throwing a clumsy punch. Julian released the first man with a push that sent him stumbling into a table, and sidestepped the punch, his hand coming up to strike a pressure point on the man's neck. The man grunted, his arm going numb, and collapsed into a chair, gasping. The entire exchange took less than 15 seconds. It was over. The restaurant was silent, save for the second man's labored breathing. Julian stood, straightening his jacket, his posture calm and centered. He hadn't broken a sweat. The restaurant manager was rushing over, his face pale, fumbling with his phone to call the police. Julian turned to Alara. "Are you and your son all right?" She could only nod, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and gratitude. She was holding Leo tightly, who had buried his face in her side. One of the waiters, a young man who had served in the army, recognized the efficiency, the absolute lack of wasted motion. He looked at Julian with dawning respect. "Sir, that was professional." Julian gave a slight nod. "Navy," he said, the single word explaining everything. He then knelt down beside Maya's booth. "You okay, sweet pea?" Maya looked at him, her eyes shining. "You were like a superhero, Daddy." He managed a small, genuine smile. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he might have been. He looked back at Alara and her silent son, and felt the first tentative crack in the walls he had so carefully constructed around his heart. The aftermath was a blur of hushed apologies from the restaurant staff and the quiet efficiency of the arriving police officers. Julian gave his statement with practiced calm, his voice a low, steady murmur that seemed to cut through the lingering tension in the air. He downplayed the incident, framing it as a simple de-escalation, but the officers, noting the swift and clean resolution, looked at him with a knowing respect. Through it all, his attention kept returning to Alara and Leo. They sat huddled together, a small island in the sea of disruption. Alara had a protective arm wrapped around her son, her knuckles white where she gripped her own sleeve. Leo hadn't made a sound. His face was still buried in his mother's side, his small shoulders rigid. Julian's heart ached for them. He recognized the look in Alara's eyes. It wasn't just fear, but a deep, weary exhaustion, as if this was just one more battle in a long, unending war. When the police finally led the two belligerent men away, a fragile quiet descended once more. The manager insisted their meals were on the house, an offer Julian accepted with a gracious nod, mostly for Alara's sake. He walked back to her table, his own daughter, Maya, trailing shyly behind him. "I'm Julian Vance," he said softly, not wanting to startle them. "And this is Maya." Alara looked up, her eyes a startling shade of hazel, flecked with green and gold. They were filled with a profound gratitude that made him feel both heroic and deeply unworthy. "Alara Petrova. And this is Leo," she gently stroked her son's hair. "Thank you. I don't know what would have happened." "It was nothing," Julian said, though they both knew it wasn't. "No one should have to endure that." Maya, ever the diplomat, stepped forward. "I like your drawings," she said, pointing to the open sketchbook on the table. A half-finished drawing of a dragon with butterfly wings was visible. Leo peeked out from his mother's embrace. He looked at Maya, then at the sketchbook, and then at Julian. He didn't speak, but he slid the sketchbook across the table. "He's a little shy," Alara explained, her voice laced with an apology that Julian wished he could erase. "He likes to let his pictures do the talking." Julian knelt down to Leo's level, his movements slow and deliberate. "That's a powerful dragon," he said, his voice gentle. "I like his wings." For the first time, a flicker of something other than fear crossed the boy's face. He picked up a pencil and, with a few quick strokes, added a small, smiling girl with curly hair, unmistakably Maya, riding on the dragon's back. A genuine smile touched Julian's lips. "See, Maya? I told you. A superhero." They finished their meals in a shared, comfortable silence. The initial shock gave way to a tentative connection, a fragile thread woven in the chaos. When it was time to leave, Julian walked them to the door. Can I give you a ride?" he offered. "It's late." "Thank you, but we live just a few blocks away," Alara said, pulling her coat tighter around herself. The walk will do us good. He understood her need to reclaim a sense of normalcy, of control. He simply nodded. All right, be safe. As they walked away, Alara's small hand holding Leo's, Julian felt an unexpected pang of loss, as if a brief flicker of warmth was receding into the cold night. Days turned into a week. Life reverted to its familiar, sterile rhythm. Julian oversaw the final renderings for the Northgate Tower, a project that would redefine the city's skyline. He attended board meetings where millions of dollars were discussed with the emotional investment of a grocery list. He ate dinners with Maya in their silent, cavernous penthouse, the floor-to-ceiling windows displaying a city that felt a million miles away. But the image of Alara and Leo remained, a stubborn, colorful brushstroke on the gray canvas of his life. He found himself thinking of the quiet strength in her eyes, the fierce, protective love she had for her silent son. It was a Saturday afternoon when it happened. He had promised Maya a trip to the Old City Library, a rare excursion into a part of town he usually avoided, a district of cobblestone streets and historic brick buildings that stood in defiance of his modern, steel and glass aesthetic. As they walked, hand in hand, he saw a small, unassuming storefront with a hand-painted sign, Second Bloom Restorations. Curiosity, an emotion he hadn't felt in years, tugged at him. He peered through the large front window. The inside was a chaotic wonderland of forgotten treasures. A three-legged Victorian chair, a stack of antique trunks, a grandfather clock with no hands. And in the middle of it all, covered in a fine layer of sawdust, was Alara. She was bent over a large, ornate wooden chest, her brow furrowed in concentration as she meticulously applied a clear varnish with a small brush. Leo sat at a small table nearby, sketching in his book, a halo of sunlight from the window illuminating his dark curls. Julian felt his heart give a strange, unfamiliar lurch. Without thinking, he pushed open the door. A small bell chimed. Alara looked up, startled. Her eyes widened in recognition. A faint blush rose on her cheeks as she hastily wiped her hands on her apron. Julian, what are you doing here? We were on our way to the library, he said, feeling suddenly awkward, an intruder in her world. I saw your shop. Daddy, look, Maya exclaimed, pointing to a beautiful old rocking horse in the corner. He's beautiful. He needs a new tail, Alara said with a soft smile. But yes, he is. She looked at Julian, her expression a mix of surprise and uncertainty. Welcome to my little corner of the world. Her world was the complete opposite of his. His was a world of sharp angles, clean lines, and cold surfaces. Hers was filled with the scent of lemon oil and old wood, with the gentle curves of worn furniture and the patient hum of quiet work. It was a world where broken things were not discarded, but mended. An idea, sudden and compelling, took root in his mind. He thought of the old music box that had belonged to his grandmother, sitting broken in a drawer in his sterile apartment. It hadn't played its tune in 20 years. I have something, he began, the words coming out before he could second-guess them. An old music box. The mechanism is broken. I was wondering, could you fix it? Alara's smile was small, but it reached her eyes, warming them from within. I can try, she said. I love a challenge. Leo looked up from his drawing. He had sketched the rocking horse, but now he had given it magnificent feathery wings. He looked at Julian and then added a tiny, intricate music box to the saddle. Julian met the boy's solemn gaze and felt that fragile thread from the restaurant pull a little tighter, connecting their separate, lonely worlds. This, he realized, was not about fixing a music box. It was about seeing if something broken in his own life could be mended, too. A few days later, Julian found himself standing outside Second Bloom Restorations, again, the small, velvet-lined case containing his grandmother's music box feeling heavy in his hand. Evening was settling over the city, and the warm, golden light from the shop window was a beacon against the deepening twilight. He pushed the door open, the little bell announcing his arrival with a cheerful chime. Alara was at her workbench, a pair of delicate-looking spectacles perched on her nose. The air was thick with the comforting, nostalgic scents he was beginning to associate with her: turpentine, beeswax, and freshly brewed tea. She looked up, and a real, unguarded smile lit up her face. "You came," she said, as if she hadn't quite believed he would. "I keep my promises." He placed the case on a clear space on the bench. "This is it." She opened it with a reverence that touched him. The music box was small and made of inlaid rosewood, the lid depicting a pair of painted finches. It was scuffed and faded, a relic from a life he could barely remember, a life before the betrayals and the high, cold walls. Alara traced the outline of the birds with a gentle finger before carefully examining the intricate, silent brass gears inside. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "They don't make things with this kind of heart anymore." "It hasn't played since my grandmother passed away," he admitted, the confession feeling more significant than he'd intended. "I was a boy." She looked at him over the top of her glasses, her hazel eyes seeming to see right through the layers of corporate armor to the boy he'd just mentioned. "Well," she said softly, "let's see if we can't wake it up." Leo was at his usual spot, but tonight he was working with clay, his small hands shaping a lump of gray earth into something that looked like a sleeping cat. He glanced at Julian, then offered a small, shy wave. Julian waved back, a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the shop's pot-bellied stove. He had intended to just drop off the box and leave, to retreat to the safety of his ordered, predictable world. But he didn't move. He found himself leaning against a tall chest of drawers, content to simply watch her work. He watched her hands, so steady and sure, as she used a tiny pair of tweezers to probe the delicate mechanism. "So this is what you do," he said, breaking the comfortable silence. "You fix things." She nodded, not looking up from her task. "It's more than that. Every piece has a story, a history. Look at this armoire." She gestured with her head towards a massive dark wood piece against the far wall. "It belonged to a family for 3 generations. It saw weddings, births, Christmases. Then it got sold in an estate sale, got a big scratch down the side during the move, and ended up in a junk shop, forgotten. People see the scratch, the broken hinge, and they think it's worthless." She paused, finally looking at him. "But the story is still in there. The strength is still in the wood. It just needs someone to see it, to give it a second chance." The words hung in the air between them, imbued with a meaning that went far beyond furniture. He was a man who built new things, who raised the old to make way for the gleaming and the modern. His entire career was based on the premise that what was broken should be replaced. Alara's philosophy was the antithesis of his own. She didn't replace, she healed. "Why did you start this shop?" he asked, his voice quieter than before. She set down her tools and took off her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. The gesture was so human, so weary and real, that it made his heart ache. "After Leo's father left," she began, her gaze drifting to her son. A universe of love and pain in that single look. "Things were hard. I had an art degree, a portfolio of paintings nobody wanted to buy, and a baby who depended on me for everything." She took a deep breath. "And then, there was an incident, a home invasion. It was terrifying. We were lucky we weren't physically hurt, but..." It stole Leo's voice. "The doctors called it selective mutism, a trauma response. My vibrant, chattering little boy just went quiet. He retreated into a world where he felt safe, a world of pictures and silence." Julian felt the air leave his lungs. He finally understood the depth of the fear he'd seen in her eyes at the restaurant. It wasn't just about 2 drunks. It was a ghost of a far greater terror. "I'm so sorry, Alara. I fell apart for a while," she continued, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "The world felt broken. I felt broken. Then one day, I found an old wobbly table on the curb, waiting for the trash, and I had this overwhelming urge to fix it. I took it home, I sanded it, glued it, stained it, and when I was done, it was sturdy again. It was whole. And I realized I couldn't fix the world. I couldn't even fix my own son, but I could fix this table. And that was something. It was a start. She looked around her shop, at the beautiful, resurrected pieces of furniture, each one a testament to her quiet resilience. So I started Second Bloom. I fix broken things. It helps me feel like I have some control. Like I'm building a world for Leo that's safe and solid, one piece of repaired furniture at a time. Julian stood there, silent, the carefully constructed edifice of his own self-pity crumbling to dust. His betrayal, his divorce, they were real wounds, yes, but he had retreated into a fortress of wealth. Alara had taken her broken pieces and built a sanctuary. She hadn't hidden from the world. She had learned to mend it, one small piece at a time. He looked from her strong, capable hands to the silent, broken music box, and he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that he had brought it to the right place. He had brought it to a healer. The weeks that followed settled into a new, unexpected rhythm. What began as a simple commission to repair a music box blossomed into a quiet routine. Julian found himself inventing reasons to be in the old historic district. A meeting that could have been an email became a necessary in-person visit. A trip to the library with Maya now always included a detour to Second Bloom. The shop became a sanctuary for him as much as it was for Alara. It was a place where the relentless demands of his world fell away, replaced by the scent of sawdust and the patient scratch of sandpaper on wood. He started to help, at first in small ways. He'd lift a heavy cabinet that was too much for Alara to manage on her own, or use his architect's precision to help her measure a piece for cutting. One afternoon, he found her struggling with a leaky pipe under the shop's small sink. Without a word, he rolled up the sleeves of his $1,000 shirt, found a wrench in her chaotic toolbox, and slid under the sink. He emerged 20 minutes later with a smudge of grease on his cheek and a profound sense of satisfaction he hadn't felt in years. He had built skyscrapers, but fixing that simple leak felt more real, more fundamentally useful than any of them. Alara had watched him, a mixture of amusement and gratitude in her eyes. She handed him a cup of tea, her fingers brushing his. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a jolt of warmth through him that had nothing to do with the tea. "Careful," she teased. "You keep this up, I might have to start paying you." "Consider it a down payment on the music box," he'd replied, his smile feeling easy and natural. Their children were the silent, sturdy bridge between them. Maya, with her bright, ceaseless chatter, seemed to intuitively understand Leo's silence. She didn't press him to speak. Instead, she would narrate their games for him, providing a running commentary as they built magnificent Lego castles or drew collaborative pictures in his sketchbook. "And now the brave knight, Sir Leo, is adding a moat to protect the castle from the tickle monster," she would announce, and Leo would reward her with a rare, radiant smile. Julian saw how Alara watched them, her heart in her eyes. He saw the relief, the joy that another child could so easily accept her son for who he was. Their time together began to bleed from the shop into the small, cozy apartment above it. Alara would insist he and Maya stay for dinner. They ate simple meals of pasta or soup at her small, perfectly restored wooden table. In the warm glow of her kitchen, surrounded by the comforting clutter of a life well lived, Leo's drawings taped to the fridge, a stack of library books on the counter, a pot of herbs on the windowsill, Julian felt the icy loneliness of his own penthouse thaw. His home was a showcase. Hers was a haven. One Saturday he brought her something. It was a large, potted ficus from his balcony. Its leaves were yellowing and brittle, a testament to his neglect. He carried it into the shop like a patient on a stretcher. "I have a confession," he said, setting it down. "I'm a plant killer." Alara circled the sad-looking tree, a doctor assessing a patient. She touched a dry leaf, which crumbled at her touch. "Oh, you poor thing," she murmured to the plant. She looked at Julian, a gentle challenge in her eyes. "There's life in it yet. It just needs some attention, some sunlight, the right kind of care." The symbolism was so obvious it was almost comical, yet it struck him with the force of a revelation. He was that plant, starved of warmth, living in a glass box, slowly withering. He started talking more, Not about work, but about things that mattered. He told her about growing up in a small town, about his grandmother's kindness, about the simple joy of building things with his hands as a boy. He was excavating a version of himself he thought had been buried long ago. The true turning point came one cool autumn evening. The children were asleep, Maya in a sleeping bag on the floor and Leo in his bed. Julian and Alara were on her tiny balcony, which overlooked a quiet, tree-lined street. The city's gleaming towers were visible in the distance, a separate world of cold, glittering light. "The music box is almost ready," she said, her voice soft in the darkness. The mainspring was cracked. It needed to be completely rebuilt. "You can do that?" he asked, amazed. "I told you," she smiled. "I like a challenge." A comfortable silence fell between them, filled only by the distant hum of the city. He felt a profound sense of peace, a feeling so foreign he almost didn't recognize it. It was the feeling of being seen, truly seen. "Ilara," he began, the name feeling right on his tongue. "There's something I need to tell you." He took a deep breath and finally, after years of silence, he gave voice to the betrayal that had hollowed him out. He told her about Marcus Thorne, his partner and friend since college. He described their shared dream of building a different kind of architectural firm, one based on integrity and innovation. And then he told her how Marcus had systematically stolen that dream, how he had leveraged their company's assets to start his own firm, taking their biggest clients and their most promising projects. "But it was more than that," Julian said, his voice raw with the memory. He had been having an affair with my wife, Sarah, for years. The day I found out about the business, she told me she was leaving me for him. It all happened at once. I lost my company, my best friend, and my wife in the span of 24 hours. He stared out at the distant lights of the skyscrapers, some of which Marcus had built on the foundations of their stolen plans. "I didn't just lose a business. I lost my faith, in friendship, in loyalty, in love. I decided trust was a liability. So I rebuilt, but I did it alone. I built walls so high no one could ever get in again." He finally turned to look at her. Her face was illuminated by the soft glow from the apartment, and he saw not pity, but a deep, resonant understanding. She reached out and placed her hand on his arm, her touch both a question and an answer. "Walls keep you safe," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But they're also a prison. Nothing can get in, but you can't get out, either." He looked at her hand on his arm, then into her kind, clear eyes. He felt the old, familiar instinct to pull away, to retreat behind the battlements. But he didn't. For the first time, he held his ground, allowing her warmth to seep past his defenses. Just then, his phone buzzed, a harsh intrusion from the world he'd momentarily forgotten. It was an alert from a trade publication. The headline made his blood run cold. "Thorne Development wins preliminary bid for city revitalization project." It was the project he had been working on for over a year, his magnum opus, the project that was meant to be his legacy, his ultimate victory over the man who had taken everything. And Marcus, once again, was poised to steal it from him. The ghost he thought he had outrun had just appeared on his doorstep. The past was not finished with him yet. The news of Marcus Thorne's preliminary bid landed like a stone in the quiet pool of Julian's newfound peace. The city revitalization project wasn't just another contract. It was personal. It was a sprawling, ambitious plan to breathe new life into the city's neglected waterfront, transforming derelict warehouses and forgotten piers into a vibrant public space. It was a project rooted in community and vision, everything he believed architecture should be. It was his chance to prove that he could build something that wasn't just tall but meaningful. And Marcus was about to turn it into another monument to his own greed. A cold, familiar anger began to coil in Julian's gut. He spent the next few days in a fugue of relentless work, diving back into the world of blueprints, structural analyses, and financial projections. His team at the firm, accustomed to his detached, professional demeanor, were taken aback by the new, sharp edge to his voice. He was a general preparing for war. He saw less of Alara and the children. He told himself it was necessary, that he needed to focus, to fight. But a deeper, more honest part of him knew he was retreating. The threat of Marcus had triggered his old defenses, and the walls he'd started to lower were being hastily rebuilt, brick by painful brick. One evening, he was working late, the city a carpet of glittering lights beneath his penthouse office, when his assistant buzzed through. "Mr. Vance? A Marcus Thorne is here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment." Julian's hands clenched into fists. "Send him in." Marcus strode into the office, his suit impeccably tailored, his smile a predatory slash. He looked exactly the same, confident, charming, and utterly soulless. "Julian, good to see you," Marcus said, his tone dripping with false sincerity. He glanced around the magnificent office. "You've done well for yourself. I always knew you had it in you. Once you got out of your own way, of course." "What do you want, Marcus?" Julian's voice was ice. "Straight to business." "I like it." Marcus perched on the edge of Julian's massive desk. "The revitalization project. It's a beautiful plan. Your plan, I assume? It has your fingerprints all over it. All that earnest, bleeding heart nonsense about green spaces and public access." "It's a good plan," Julian said through gritted teeth. "It's a sentimental plan," Marcus corrected. "My plan is more profitable, and the city council tends to listen to profit. But I'm a sentimental guy myself. I remember our old dream, so I'm here to offer you a deal. Withdraw your bid. Endorse mine. I'll cut you in. A small percentage for old time's sake. You get a piece of your legacy project, and I handle the messy business of making it actually work." Julian stared at him, incredulous. "You come into my office, after everything you did, and offer me scraps from my own table?" Marcus's smile tightened. "Don't be a fool, Julian. You can't beat me. I have the council in my pocket. This is your only way to get a win." He stood up, smoothing his suit jacket. "I heard you've been spending time in the historic district. Quaint. Found yourself a little project? A furniture fixer, I hear. Sweet girl. Single mom." Julian went rigid. "You leave her out of this." Marcus's eyes glinted with triumph. He had found the weak point in the armor. "Oh, I'm not interested in her. But her little shop, Second Bloom, is it? It's sitting right in the middle of a parcel my development plan has designated for. Let's see." He feigned checking a mental list. "Ah yes, a multi-level parking garage. Essential infrastructure." The threat was clear, delivered with a chilling nonchalance. "You wouldn't," Julian whispered, the words catching in his throat. "Business is business," Marcus said with a shrug. "Eminent domain is a powerful tool. A shame to see a small business like that get bulldozed, but that's progress, isn't it? Of course, if you were to withdraw your bid, I might be persuaded to revise my plans. Find another spot for all that essential parking." He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. "You can have your legacy project, Julian, or she can have her little hobby shop. You can't have both. Think about it." The door clicked shut, leaving Julian alone in the suffocating silence of his office. The city lights outside seemed to mock him, a constellation of his own ambition and folly. Marcus had laid a perfect trap. He had found Julian's one vulnerability, his burgeoning hope, his connection to Alara, and had put a price on it. The next day, the official notice arrived at Alara's shop. It was a cold, legal document, full of bureaucratic jargon that all boiled down to one brutal fact. The building that housed her shop and her home was slated for condemnation to make way for the new development. It included a buyout offer so insultingly low it wouldn't even cover the cost of moving her equipment. Julian was there when she opened it. He watched the color drain from her face, watched her hands tremble as she read the words. He saw that look in her eyes again, the same cornered, terrified look from the restaurant. And he knew with a sickening certainty that he was the cause. His past, his war with Marcus, had followed him here and was now threatening to destroy her safe, carefully mended world. "I can fix this," he said, his voice sounding hollow even to his own ears. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his. There was no accusation in them, only a deep, heartbreaking fear. How, Julian? How do you fight something like this? He was trapped. If he fought for the project and won, her home would be destroyed. If he backed down, he would be handing a victory to the man who had ruined him, proving Marcus right, that sentiment was a weakness, that love was a liability. He was standing at a precipice, forced to choose between the man he had been and the man he was desperately hoping to become. The price of his redemption, it seemed, was the very happiness he had just begun to find. The days that followed were a torturous limbo. Julian was caught in an impossible position, the weight of his choice pressing down on him, suffocating him. He threw himself into his work, searching for a loophole, a third option, a clever architectural solution that could save both the project and Alara's shop. But there was none. Marcus had designed his proposal with brutal efficiency. The parking garage was central to the plan's traffic flow and profitability, and its location was non-negotiable. He saw the toll the uncertainty was taking on Alara. The light in her eyes had dimmed. She still worked in her shop, her hands still moving with their familiar grace. But there was a frantic, desperate energy to her movements now. She was a person trying to hold her world together while the ground crumbled beneath her feet. One evening, he found her sitting on the floor of the shop, surrounded by pieces of the disassembled music box. Tears were streaming silently down her face. "I can't fix it," she whispered, her voice cracking. "This one tiny gear. It's stripped. I've tried everything, but it's broken. It won't catch." He knew she wasn't talking about the music box. He sat down on the floor beside her, the scent of sawdust and her quiet sorrow filling the space between them. "This is my fault, Alara." She shook her head, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "No, it's not. This is about him, about his greed. It's not about you." "But he's using you to get to me," Julian insisted, the guilt a physical ache in his chest. "If I wasn't in your life, this would never have happened." She turned to face him, her hazel eyes fierce and clear despite the tears. "And if you weren't in my life, I'd be facing this alone. Don't you see? Having you here, even in the middle of this mess, makes it bearable." She took a shaky breath. "Julian, you can't give up your project for me. That's what he wants. He wants to see you beaten. That project, it's your dream. It's a part of who you are. I've seen the way you talk about it. You can't let him take that from you again." "And I'm supposed to let him take this from you?" he asked, his voice raw. "Your home? Your business? The safe world you built for Leo?" "We'll be okay," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of its usual strength. "We always are. We'll find another shop. We'll start over. We're good at starting over. But you can't let him win. You have to fight." Her integrity, her selflessness, was a punch to the gut. She was willing to lose everything to see him triumph, while he was considering sacrificing his principles just to escape the conflict. Her quiet courage showed him just how deep his own cowardice ran. He looked at this incredible woman who took broken things and made them whole, and he felt the full, crushing weight of his own brokenness. He left her shop that night feeling more lost than ever. He walked the city streets for hours, ending up at the waterfront, the site of the proposed project. He stood on the old, rotting pier, looking at the derelict warehouses, their windows like vacant eyes. In his mind, he could see his vision. The parks, the walkways, the community theater, the children playing by the water fountains. It was beautiful. It was clean. It was his. But then the vision shifted. He saw the wrecking ball swinging into the side of the old brick building that housed Second Bloom. He saw Alara and Leo standing on the sidewalk, watching their world be reduced to rubble. And his beautiful vision turned to ash in his mind. He realized Marcus was right about one thing. He couldn't have both. He couldn't win his project and save her shop. He had to choose. He spent the entire night in his office, not working on his presentation, but staring out the window at the city he wanted to reshape. He thought about his life. He had spent the last 5 years building an empire of glass and steel, a fortress designed to protect him from the pain of betrayal. He had told himself that success was the best revenge. Winning this project would be the final, ultimate victory over Marcus. It would be vindication. But what would that victory cost? It would cost the warmth of Alara's kitchen. It would cost the sound of Maya's laughter echoing in the dusty, sunlit shop. It would cost the quiet trust in Leo's eyes. It would cost the feeling of her hand on his arm. A simple touch that had managed to breach walls he'd thought were impenetrable. He realized, with a sudden, stunning clarity, that winning on Marcus's terms wasn't a victory at all. It was the ultimate defeat. It would mean becoming him. It would mean sacrificing a person for a project, a heart for a building. It would mean proving that his own heart was just as cold and empty as his penthouse apartment. A decision, clean and sharp as a plumb line, settled in his soul. He finally knew what he had to do. It wasn't about finding a third option. It was about choosing the right one. He picked up the phone and called his lead designer. "Get the team together," he said, his voice firm, clear, and for the first time in a long time, completely certain. "We're redesigning the entire proposal. From scratch. And we have less than 48 hours to do it." The day of the final presentation to the city council arrived gray and overcast, the sky threatening a storm that mirrored the one in Julian's soul. He walked into the council chambers. His new set of blueprints rolled tightly under his arm. He felt strangely calm. He was about to risk everything, his reputation, his firm's biggest project, his entire professional future, on a principle. And it felt right. Marcus was already there, schmoozing with council members, his confidence radiating like heat. He gave Julian a smug, knowing look as he passed. "Come to your senses, Julian? Ready to do the smart thing?" Julian just met his gaze, his expression unreadable, and walked to his seat. Alara was in the audience. He hadn't told her his plan, only that she should be there. She sat in the back row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face pale with anxiety. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and he gave her a small, reassuring nod. He hoped it was a promise he could keep. Marcus's presentation was first. It was a masterclass in corporate doublespeak. He spoke of maximizing urban density, economic streamlining, and shareholder value. His renderings showed a cold, efficient world of gleaming towers. As promised, a massive, soulless concrete parking garage where Alara's shop currently stood. It was a vision of profit, not of people. A few of the more business-minded council members nodded along, impressed by the projected revenue. Then it was Julian's turn. He walked to the podium and unrolled his original blueprints, the ones he had spent a year perfecting. He laid them out for the council to see, his beautiful, sweeping vision of parks and public spaces. "This was my plan," he began, his voice steady and clear, filling the chamber. "It's a good plan. It's innovative, it's aesthetically pleasing, and it is profitable." He looked at Marcus, then at the council members. "But it's also wrong." A murmur went through the room. Marcus's smug smile faltered. Julian rolled up the blueprints and set them aside. He didn't unroll the new ones. Not yet. He decided to speak from the heart. "For the past few years, I've been in the business of building things," he said, his gaze sweeping across the room and landing on Alara. "I've built skyscrapers that touch the clouds. I've built monuments to commerce. I thought that was what architecture was about. I thought it was about legacy, about making your mark on the world. I was wrong." He took a breath. "Architecture isn't about steel and glass. It's about people. It's about community. It's about creating spaces where people can live and work and connect. A city isn't just a collection of buildings. It's a collection of stories, of histories." He pointed toward the back of the room, in the direction of the historic district. "Right now, in this city, there's a small shop called Second Bloom Restorations. It's run by a woman who takes broken, forgotten pieces of our city's history and makes them whole again. She gives them a second chance. That shop, and the dozens of other small businesses like it in that district, are the heart and soul of the city. They are our living history." He finally looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Thorne's plan calls for demolishing that entire district to build a parking garage. He calls it progress. I call it an amputation. You cannot revitalize a city by cutting out its heart. He then unrolled his new blueprints. The room gasped. The design was radically different. It was smaller, less grandiose, but infinitely more thoughtful. The waterfront was still transformed, but the plan now flowed around the historic district, preserving it entirely. He had incorporated the old brick buildings into the design, turning the area into a protected, pedestrian-only artisan's quarter. He had replaced the massive parking garage with a more modest, environmentally friendly underground structure on the other side of the development. "This is my new proposal," Julian announced. "It's less profitable. The return on investment will be smaller on paper. But the return to the community, to the soul of our city, will be immeasurable. This plan doesn't just build new structures. It honors the old ones. It chooses community over concrete. It chooses people over profit." He then delivered the final blow. And it does so without resorting to predatory eminent domain tactics designed to intimidate and displace the small business owners who make this city great. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Marcus was ashen-faced, his confident facade completely shattered. The council members were looking at the new plans, then at Julian, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning respect. Julian had done more than present a new plan. He had drawn a moral line in the sand. He had publicly chosen integrity over ambition, sacrificing his own potential profit to do the right thing. He had shown them what kind of man he was. He rolled up his blueprints and returned to his seat, his heart pounding. He had no idea if he had just saved his project or committed career suicide. But as he looked back at Alara and saw the tears of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude streaming down her face, he knew, with every fiber of his being, that he had already won. The council's deliberation was surprisingly brief. The head councilwoman, a formidable woman with a reputation for her no-nonsense commitment to the city's heritage, called the meeting back to order. Her gaze was fixed on Julian. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice resonating with authority. "This council has long been concerned with the aggressive, profit-at-all-costs tactics of certain development firms. We have also been searching for a flagship project that does more than just enrich investors. A project that enriches the city itself." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the silent chamber. "Your original proposal was impressive. Your new proposal is inspirational," she smiled, "a rare and powerful thing." The council votes unanimously. The city revitalization project is awarded to Vance Architecture, under the condition that the revised, community-focused plan is the one that is built. A wave of applause erupted in the chamber. Julian felt a dizzying sense of relief wash over him, so potent it almost buckled his knees. He had not only saved Alara's shop, he had won. He had won on his own terms. He had beaten Marcus not by playing his game, but by refusing to play it at all. Marcus Thorne sat frozen in his chair, his face a mask of disbelief and humiliation, a man utterly defeated by an opponent who had chosen a different kind of victory. Julian's team was ecstatic, slapping him on the back, but his eyes searched for only one person. Alara was making her way toward him, her face a beautiful, tear-streaked canvas of joy and disbelief. He met her in the aisle, the noisy celebration of the room fading into a distant buzz. "You did it," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I can't believe you did it." "I didn't do it for the project," he said, his voice low and earnest, meant only for her. "I did it for me. I did it to become the kind of man who deserves to stand beside a woman like you." The world seemed to shrink until it was only the two of them. He saw his own hope reflected in her shining eyes. The walls he had spent years building were gone, not just breached, but completely dismantled, leaving his heart open and vulnerable and, for the first time in a very long time, truly free. He raised a hand and gently brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. And then, right there in the middle of the crowded council chambers, he lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of triumphant passion, but one of profound homecoming. It was gentle and certain, a quiet confirmation of everything that had been building between them. It tasted of relief, of hope, and of the sweet, simple promise of a new beginning. It was the feeling of a broken thing finally being made whole. In that moment, surrounded by the blueprints of a new future for the city, Julian Vance realized he had finally designed his masterpiece. It wasn't a building of steel and glass, but a life built on a foundation of courage, integrity, and love. 1 year later, the sun was warm on Julian's face, a perfect, golden autumn afternoon. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the young oak trees that dotted the sprawling green lawn of the new waterfront park. In the distance, the city skyline gleamed, but here, on the grass, the only sounds were the distant laughter of children and the happy shrieks of Maya chasing a monarch butterfly. He was stretched out on a large picnic blanket, his head resting in Alara's lap. She was humming softly, her fingers idly tracing patterns in his hair. Her shop, Second Bloom, was visible from where they sat, nestled in the heart of the now-thriving Artisans' Quarter. The historic district had become the jewel of the revitalization project, a bustling, vibrant neighborhood where tourists and locals alike came to browse the unique, independent shops. Her business had never been better. He opened his eyes and looked up at her. The tired, worried lines that had once etched her face were gone, replaced by a serene and radiant happiness that still took his breath away. "What are you smiling at?" she asked, her own lips curving in response. "Just this," he said, gesturing around them. "All of it." His gaze fell on their children. Maya had given up her butterfly chase and was now sitting with Leo under a large willow tree. They were drawing in his sketchbook, their heads bent close together in shared concentration. Leo had started talking a few months after the council meeting. It had started with single words, whispered only to his mother, then to Maya. Now he was a quiet but confident boy, his voice growing stronger every day. He still loved to draw, but his pictures were no longer a shield. They were an invitation. A moment later, Leo looked up, his eyes finding Julian's across the lawn. He held up the sketchbook to show them his latest creation. A detailed drawing of the four of them, a chaotic, smiling family, having their picnic under the tree. "Look," Leo called out, his voice clear and proud. He pointed at the figure of Julian in the drawing. "Dad!" The word, so simple, so profound, struck Julian with the force of a physical blow. It was the first time Leo had called him that. His throat tightened, and a sudden, sharp joy pricked at the backs of his eyes. He looked at Alara, who was already crying, her tears silent and happy. He sat up and waved at Leo, a wide, unconditional grin spreading across his face. "It's a great picture, son." Later that evening, they all went up to the rooftop of what had once been Julian's cold, sterile penthouse. The vast, empty space was now a lush, thriving garden. Alara's resurrected ficus tree stood tall and proud in the center, its leaves a vibrant green. There were planter boxes overflowing with tomatoes and herbs, trellises heavy with climbing roses, and a small, chaotic patch of wildflowers that Maya and Leo had planted themselves. As the sun began to set, casting the city in hues of orange and pink, Julian stood by the railing, Alara's hand in his, their children chasing fireflies among the plants. He thought of the broken music box, now fully restored, that sat on their mantelpiece, its delicate tune a regular feature of their evenings. He had learned that some things weren't meant to be replaced, but to be mended with patience and care. He had once believed that a man's legacy was written in steel and stone, in the imposing structures he left behind. But as he looked at the woman he loved, and the children who were now, impossibly, his, he knew the truth. A true legacy wasn't about building something for the world to see. It was about building a small, safe, warm world for the people you love. It was about taking a broken, empty space and